Majesty the Queen is pleased to confer upon her Prime Minister, Robert Gordon Menzies, the knighthood of the most ancient and most noble order of the Thistle. A significantly high honour, the personal gift of our monarch to a distinguished Australian. A career which summed up spans 35 years in politics and a record term as Prime Minister. In the government led by Joseph Lyons in 1935, a very young-looking Mr. Menzies was appointed Attorney General. In that cabinet, the fiery Billy Hughes. When Lyons died in 1939, it was Menzies who ultimately succeeded him.
This task was begun by the administration under my late leader and friend, Mr. Lyons. And this new administration will spare neither time nor energy in pushing on with this great work.
The road was difficult. He inherited the pig iron dispute from the Lyons administration. Watersiders opposed Japan's war against China and struck against shipping potential war material. Then, World War II. The Commonwealth faced a grim participating role.
We can't be beaten except by ourselves. We can't be beaten except by disunity within our own ranks, by the occasional ugly act of treachery within our own ranks.
Cabinet began the task of initiating Australia's war program. Within months, expeditionary forces were raised, trained and headed for the main theatres of action. It was decided that Prime Minister Menzies should gain first-hand information. The principal AIF contingent was engaged in the Middle East under the command of General Blamey, later to become the first Australian to hold the rank of Field Marshal. As many of us, including Mr. Menzies, recall, these were times of almost continued reverses for the Allies, and many diggers paid the supreme sacrifice. There was a visit to the ill-fated H.M.A.S. Perth, later to be a casualty of the war which had by then come much closer to home. Following the UAP defeat by Labour in the elections of 1941 and after nearly 8 years leading the opposition, a landslide vote brought a Menzies government back to power in 1949. A brilliant comeback marking perhaps the real beginning of his career.
I just want to say this to you. You have given us not only an enormous majority, but an enormous task.
And from his office in Parliament House, the Prime Minister undertook, among other things, the encouragement of all kinds of national development. This was a land rich in mineral resources, including uranium, the vital metal of a new age. The Australian economy steadily improved. At Woomera Rocket Range, the famed Jendivik pilotless aircraft was devised and perfected by our own scientists and technicians. Then another war crisis on the Korean 38th parallel. Mr. Menzies assured President Truemen of Australia's support, and indeed our troops were among the first to join the Americans. He became the first Australian Prime Minister to address Congress.
All I want to do is to express to you my own faith and the faith of my own country, that we all have laid on us today a duty to be prepared, to be strong, not with the strength of a bully, but with the strength of a deliverer. May all that you stand for and that we stand for be preserved under the providence of God for the happiness of mankind.
Largely due to Mr. Menzies' representations, the first royal tour in 1954 by a reigning monarch. An ardent royalist, the Prime Minister emphatically believes in loyalty to the throne. For Mr. Menzies, or any country's leader, there is little private life. The wedding of his daughter Heather made national news. But for the Prime Minister and Dame Patty, like any parents, there is family happiness in their children and grandchildren. London, 1956, and a meeting to discuss a possible solution to the Suez crisis, with Britain's Prime Minister Anthony Eden and Mr. Menzies in critical roles. Appointed by the International Conference, Mr. Menzies led a five-nation committee to place proposals before Egypt's President Nasser. It is most certainly to our Prime Minister's credit that he was entrusted with this difficult mission. None but his most vehement detractors could deny that he acquitted himself with dignity and purpose. Later at the White House, Mr. Menzies was to talk personally on the situation to President Eisenhower, who publicly expressed the thanks of the American people. Back home, more progress and expansion as vast national projects began to reflect the growing pace of Australia's development. Though not necessarily the initiator of some of these projects, the Prime Minister and his government have been solidly behind those schemes of benefit to the nation. As the world entered the nuclear age, so did we, and in such practical form as to assure our future position. And Dame Patty, always an inspiration and a distinguished citizen in her own right. 1962, and Mr. Menzies adopted a firm stand in discussions with Prime Minister Macmillan on Britain's entry into the European common market. Talks also with President Kennedy on this and other issues vitally concerning our two countries. Recently, national concern as the Prime Minister suffered a brief spell in hospital with a painful but happily minor stomach ailment. Certainly one of his greatest personal interests has been cricket. However, even with Sir Donald Bradman leading the Prime Minister's 11 against the MCC, it was the visitors who won the day. But as the saying goes, you can't win them all, and few have learned this lesson better than Sir Robert Menzies. Today, the motto of the Order of the Thistle perhaps sums up the character of the man. No one provokes me with impunity.